Hello and welcome to a new episode of Laravel Core Adventures, where we take pieces of our favorite PHP framework and together figure out how they work in the background. This is level number 2 of the Laravel request lifecycle. So let's dive right in. In level number 1, I gave you a brief introduction to the Laravel request lifecycle, and we checked out what is happening in this index.php file. Today, we want to dig a little bit deeper and to take a closer look at the HTTP kernel class and the handle method, which gets called here. As you can imagine, a lot of things are happening here in the background to get back the response here. Again, we're using the request to the welcome side of Laravel as our example. So as you can see, this is still working. Okay, so how do we find this handle method here? I guess you probably know the HTTP kernel class of your application, which you can find under app HTTP Kernel. Here we define our application middlewares, like the global ones, the middleware groups, and the route middlewares. But as you can see, there's no handle method. To find this handle method, we need to check this HTTP kernel class under the Illuminate namespace. And here you can find the handle method. Basically, there are 3 things happening here. First, we run some code. Then, in case of an exception, we catch them here. And third, we're dispatching this event here, that the request was actually handled. Okay, let's go through each of the steps. In this first line here, we enable to override the HTTP method parameter. It is also called form method spoofing in the Laravel docs. So here we can see this in the documentation. Since HTML only supports get and post request, we can define others like put or delete with a parameter, what you can see here. And in our handle method, we are basically just enabling this. Then we run our request through the router. And as a result, we get the response back, which we return down here. Again, this is already the finished response object with the HTML content and the HTTP headers. So let's check that out again. And here we see this response object with our HTML content of the welcome side, as well as the HTTP headers. Let's get rid of that again. And now let's find out more about what is happening with our request in order to get back this response object here. Just follow this method. And here we are now in the send request through router method. First, we bind the instance of the request to the service container. After that, we clear the cached version from the facade. This way we make sure to get the latest version of the request the next time we use the request facade. Like with this. Then it gets more interesting. The kernel's bootstrap method is called here. So what does that do? In there, we're checking first if the app already has been bootstrapped. And then if not, we run the bootstrap method on a bunch of classes. When we check them, you can already get a feeling of what is happening here. First, we're loading our environment variables from our .env file, or the cached version if possible. Then we're loading our configuration file, which we have in our application. And next, we're handling our exception and we're setting up our Laravel error reporting. Then we're registering Laravel facades and store the implementation inside the container. This is also where the register method of all your service providers is called, if you have been asking this yourself. And finally, the boot method of all service provider will also be called here. Okay, so quite a lot of things are happening here. But all these are essential steps for our application setup. Through the application instance, the boot method of all these bootstrapper classes will then be called. Like here an example of the load and variables class. Here we have it. And this is what we have for all those helper methods. Okay, now let's get back to the send request through router method. By the way, I'm using a PHP Storm shortcut to go back to the last position of the cursor. That's super handy when navigating through projects like this. Now, after the bootstrap method, the response is being created with running the request through a pipeline. A pipeline, if you don't know, is a pattern where you take some content and run it through so-called pipes. Every pipe will change the content in some way. The best example is already this here with middlewares and the request. Our request is our content in this example, and we run it through every middleware. The middleware have a handle method where you can edit the request. I'm sure you have already seen that before and used it. There is also a way to skip middlewares, like through the without middlewares trait, which you can use inside your tests. And this is what we are checking here. If not, we're using the middlewares. Also interesting here is what kind of middlewares get loaded here. So what do you think? Yeah, let's just find out together. These are the global middlewares, which are defined in our app's kernel class, which we have seen before. And there we are checking, for example, the maintenance mode. After the request has been through all these pipes, then the then method is called here. If we follow this method, we see that the request is now being dispatched to the router class. We can see this here. There it gets checked against our defined application routes, and the correct response is being returned. In our case, it's the one with the HTML from our welcome view file again. And now this response is being returned now back to the index.php file. So first through the request through router method again, which we have here, so returning this back, and then back to the kernel handle method. So here, and here we're also returning it, and now back to the index.php file. And this is here. And here it then gets returned to the user. Again, it all results in the same welcome site inside the browser. But now we learned what is happening with the request inside the HTTP kernel class. And we saw how more parts of our Laravel application have been set up on the way. In the next level, we're going to dig even deeper to find out how our request is being used to find the correct route, which you can see here, and how we create the response object that is being returned to the browser. So stay tuned and see you.